Hello, friends. Welcome to the ATC Double Cut. My name is Micah Woods. I'm here with Jon Wall, a repeat guest on the show. Jon is the golf course superintendent at the world-renowned Shanqing Bay Golf Club in the southern part of China on Hainan Island. Welcome to the show again, Jon.
Hey, Micah. Great to be back. Looking forward to talking various topics turf.
Yeah, we're in a similar part of the world. I guess southern China is kind of Southeast Asia. I'm in Bangkok now. That's Southeast Asia. Similar types of grasses, and it's always a pleasure to talk with you because I know we get to see a lot of the same grasses and some of the same management challenges, some of the same playability challenges. You know, you worked in Hong Kong before, you worked in northern Vietnam, you worked in central Vietnam. So, you know, you're familiar with a lot of the grasses that I study every day, and you're familiar with some of the weather challenges and stuff. So it's always fun to talk to you, especially, and to hear your insight on these kind of matters.
Yeah, insight might be quite generous, but yeah, I've been over here 12 years now and kind of worked within that triangle of Vietnam, Hong Kong, and now South China, where the grasses are very similar. The wet seasons can be equally punishing in each place, but there's a lot of interesting shared similarities between here and Bangkok and the rest of Southeast Asia.
Mm-hmm. And there certainly are, and I am particularly interested in talking about, I guess, the inputs that are involved in turfgrass management and the word sustainability and some of the, not just in Asia, but, you know, some of the golf development or redevelopment, certainly in Southeast Asia, in this part of the world where there's been a lot of new courses built over the past decade, 15 years. And then, specifically, I have read some of your tweets, or what are they now? Posts on X, whatever it's called now. And you seem to have a very clear insight onto stuff that just seems like bullshit. Like there might be a course that's putting a lot of pesticides, but then they put one little beehive and all of a sudden it's sustainable, and that's something that should be celebrated. And we'll read that in a press release. And perhaps I look at that and read it and say, that's nonsense, you know, that really is something sustainable that should be celebrated. But you seem to be braver than I am sometimes in calling out some of that nonsense and saying, you know, do we really want to say that a golf tournament that's sponsored by a plastics manufacturer and chemical company is so sustainable? Or are some of these things, you know, the word greenwashing comes up, of making golf seem better than it is, and just ignoring some of the things that do get done on golf courses, and instead saying, oh, we're using recycled bunker rake handles, so now all of a sudden we are an amazing property. And so that's the general thing I wanted to talk about, is this whole sustainability thing, and kind of figure out where you're coming from, because I've read your tweets, and I just, are you anti-sustainability or are you pro-sustainability? What do you think about that?
Sorry, Mike, I lost you there, but I think I can still kind of answer the question. I certainly encourage any form of environmental stewardship. If you're installing beehives, that's fantastic. The issue I sometimes take is that I think, the bar for being a champion of environmentalism, ecology, sustainability can be set very low. So if you put a pile of logs on the edge of a woodland, somehow that you're saving the planet. Where there's seemingly very little stringency in checking what else you're doing. You could be throwing your used batteries into the sea, you can be burning your old car tires, but if you do a bit of window dressing, it appears that you can certainly make yourself look very good. You can pad your CV. It just comes across as a bit disingenuous.
All right, we had some technical difficulties, but I am back. Thank you for your patience, Jon, and I heard your answer, so thank you. That is very well explained. I I guess in addition to reading your tweets and some of your feedback and kind of having a similar idea about sustainability, I've been reflecting on an article that I was a co-author on and it was published in 2013, and I've recently put that up on the ATC blog, and I'm going to bring that up on my screen. You won't be able to see it, but I think you're familiar with the article. It's the article called Documenting Your Progress Toward Sustainability. And I'm going to put a direct link to this in the show notes. And I think this is a really nice way to consider sustainability, because it's saying there's some things you can quantify. You can quantify what you're doing in the big picture, kind of like a land management year after year kind of measurement. And I know you've looked at that article recently, and I just wondered what your take is on that. If I've always liked this approach, and you're somebody who's actually managing golf courses, and I wanted to hear your take about this.
Yeah, sure. The most sustainable kind of use of a land is for it to be untouched, and then anything on top of that is almost, in some sense, detrimental to its sustainability. So the more and more we do, whether it's putting a golf course on it, putting more cart paths, buildings on it, you stray further and further away from it being sustainable in perpetuity. So basically, the way I see it, the less we do, the better. And so I'd say there are about 7 things that I think everyone should do or attempt to do less of without damaging the end product. So reducing your fertilizer use, chemical use, fuel, sand, your water use. So that's material consumption, reducing that. And as the first point in your article, I think, is reducing the turf acreage, which in turn, of course, reduces those previous 5. And then the final one of my 7, I guess, which is more applicable here, especially when you are importing a lot of goods, is your shipping miles. If you're buying American-made fertilizer in China, and that fertilizer gets produced, put on a boat, shipped around the world, and then applied, I guess the CO2 emissions on that must be astronomical. So wherever I can, that's something I don't like to do. So yeah, I guess that's the most concise, perhaps not the most eloquent way of saying just reduce what you do without impacting your product.
Right. So that's where we would measure the playability or rate if we need to consider the visual appearance of the property and the playing conditions of the property. We need to keep track of what those are and make sure that we're achieving that desired result. And then as we achieve that desired result, the idea would be to minimize the fertilizer required to do that, minimize the fuel required to do that, minimize the sand required to do that, minimize the water required to do that, minimize our carbon cost from shipping and the stuff that's coming from halfway around the world, minimize our electrical cost or our electrical usage as well. Let me see. Tell me your 7 again. fertilizer, water, pesticide, sand. What else?
Fuel and total turf acreage, and then
Okay.
shipping.
Okay.
This is a back of a cigarette packet formulation. I don't have some sustainability manifesto that I am sitting on ready to launch on this podcast for the first time. It's to me, these are just the obvious things to note. They're not necessarily the most sexy things. They're not the stuff you can put on an Instagram post and people will clap at, but it's the stuff that makes the biggest difference.
Well, good. I agree with you, and I think a lot of this was explained in this short 4-page article that was published in 2013 that Wendy Gelernter and Larry Stoll took the lead on writing it, and I was glad to be asked to be a co-author. But they did most of the heavy lifting on this. And in the blog post, there's a direct link to read the article, and I just reread it again, and I made some notes. The blog post is some notes that I made after rereading the article for the first time in a few years, and I'm struck by how relevant and useful the advice is today. So I'm just going to read a couple quotes from the article, and then we'll stop talking about it and just talk about the topic more generally. But I think there's the question of the definition, and the article says, how can you meet a goal of sustainability, the article asks, when its meaning has become so vague and diluted that a recent Google search on define sustainable yielded more than 28 million entries. That was back in 2013. And this morning, John, I just ran the same search, and the search for define sustainable, when I run it on Google in Bangkok this morning, returned not 28 million entries, but 1,640,000,000. So over the past 10 years, I think the meaning has become very vague and diluted. That situation hasn't improved. And the key thing from the article, I highlighted this. I will read this quote. By monitoring parameters that have hard and fast numbers attached to them, you will have a clear and easy way to communicate your progress as a means of motivating your employees, highlighting it in your job review, and publicizing it in your clubhouse, your newsletter, or your website. And then the article goes through to provide advice on how to cut through the hype and greenwashing and vague definitions, moving away from a mushy, confusing, and frustratingly unobtainable goal, and it suggests what to measure. And what it suggests to measure are basically the same things that you mentioned in your 7-point list, with the exception of, well, it recommended finding things. Hopefully you could find things at your facility that would be a useful sustainability quantifiable measurement that's relevant for your facility. And that could be number of bird species counted on the property every year, or it could be the number of recycled bird boxes that you've put up every year. It could be related to honeybees. It could be related to shipping material across the world, or locally sourced food served in the clubhouse or whatever. But the main thing from a turfgrass management perspective is simply to have the suitable playing conditions with a minimum amount of inputs. And I think that often gets ignored in our happy little golf industry, as we have so, I just get so much messaging about use this product, use this machine, more sand is better, and and there's less talk about these simple things that we can do that are actually sustainable. And I think long term, and in China, there's been a lot of golf courses were closed. I don't know how many courses there are in China right now, but I think it's a few hundred less than there were a few years
Very,
ago.
very ballpark figures. It was in the 600s, and I believe it's now in the 300s. And so, within the last couple of months, I've heard of a couple courses closing. So it's not cut and dry. It's ongoing.
Wow. So it's about 50% of the number of properties that there was at the peak, right? Something like that.
Don't quote me on it, but yeah,
Okay.
very, very ballpark figure there.
All right. So I appreciate you sharing that. So there are issues. That's perhaps an extreme example, but if we think of the world in the future, there's a lot of people that don't play golf and they can think of better land use than golf. So for some parts of the world, golf is popular, and people that are involved in the industry, I think they fail to see what the general public uh, perceives golf as. And I think it's quite useful to to just as a professional, as a golf course superintendent, as a greenkeeper, I think it makes sense as a professional to try to manage the property in the most sustainable way, and just be honest about what we're doing and try to do better every year. And that particular article that I've just discussed and your 7 point list that you also discussed seems to me a very reasonable way to go about doing this. And
I would agree. I would just to butt in. Sorry, I think it takes a bit of time to feel comfortable enough in what we do to implement some of these changes. I mean, you've said yourself, you used to advocate for a lot of aeration, a lot of top dressing. I've been a heavy top dresser for, most of my career up to this point. It's only in the last couple of years where I felt more comfortable producing that input and realizing, oh, I don't need to go every week. We don't need to be throwing sand all the time. And, you can get into this cycle of, more sand, more verticutting, more fertilizer, more aeration, and you increase the work. And where the reality is, if you carefully reduce and you see the effect, and then after a while you realize that, yeah, you don't need to be running at 100 miles an hour the whole time, consuming this, that, and everything.
yes, and that's where I think this quantification, or recording how much water did we use this year, what was our intensively maintained turfgrass area this year, how much diesel did we use this year, how much did it cost, how much gasoline did we use, how much did it cost. These are things that people are generally going to be able to keep track of. Like any professional turf manager is going to know how much sand they purchased and applied, how much fertilizer was purchased and applied, and how much pesticides were purchased and applied, right? And just keeping track of that, and then seeing if it can be done more efficiently over time, either with lower cost or lower amounts or lower toxicity of product selection, or less sand, or finding a sand source that has less carbon cost associated with the shipping of that sand. All of these things can be used to manage a property in a more sustainable way. And I think these things are meaningful. And I noticed that you seem to catch that, and you call out some of the hypocrisy or nonsense sometimes, where I've been a little bit more hesitant to tell people that they're doing it wrong. When I was younger, I did. I thought one of the best things to do is if somebody posted something that wasn't necessary, would be just to tell them that. And now I kind of just like let stuff slide that I don't agree with. But I admire you for being so honest about this and trying to spur conversation about it. And I've got some upcoming seminars in France where people ask me to talk specifically about sustainability. I have some upcoming seminars in Helsinki where people ask me to talk about sustainability and producing good conditions with fewer inputs, because in the EU there are restrictions on the amount of products that can be used, and there has been some extreme weather and droughts and water restrictions and so on, and turfgrass managers are, it's being mandated, it's being legislated there that they have to manage in a certain way or manage without using certain resources. So their question is, what can we learn from you about how we might be able to do this? And I don't know if the whole world's going to be like that eventually. I suppose 200 years from now or something, there will be more legislation like that all over the world. But I think it just makes sense to get out in front of this and just make sure that one is managing in the best possible way. So, and yeah, I was quite fond of the Golf Environment Organization geo-certified program, because they required 3 years of records on all of these things and an assessment of how much of your material was purchased locally and how much was coming from a long ways away. And that information used to be public on the website. I searched the website this morning, and the current iteration of the Sustainable Golf website, I just can't find the type of information that I used to find. Back in the 2016 era, 2017 era, it seems like the website, and in fact, I checked on the Wayback Machine, the Internet Archive, and I can go find how many liters of water were used in 2013, 2014, 2015 at geo-certified courses. I can't find that anymore. And I feel like that's really a step backwards from what I think the sustainability movement should be like in the industry.
Sustainability and certification programs are doing everything right. I'm sure there are so many fantastic clubs out there. But yeah, it just seems some of the stringency is not quite there. And I kind of feel like it needs to be. And look, maybe the barrier of entry is low in the beginning, and then as the popularity grows, then the barrier becomes higher to achieve, a certified status for whatever NGO wishes to do this. But from my perspective at the moment, like you say, there's not so much evidence either that's visible for you and me if we're looking for it. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there, but it could be better.
Yeah, it could be better. I used to hate the word sustainability. I went to graduate school. I was in graduate school from 2001 to 2006. And at graduate school in the United States, it's, a lot of progressive people very progressive politically and environmentally, and sustainability is kind of a popular word. And I always felt it was vague and a mushy type of word that didn't have so much meaning. And so I always tried to avoid using it. And then Steve Isaac from the RNA, who's recently retired, he shared with me a definition 15 years ago or so that the RNA had, maybe even more than 15 years ago now. And that definition, it was something like this. Sustainability for golf was optimizing the playing quality of the golf course in harmony with the conservation of its natural environment under economically sound and socially responsible management. And I thought that was fine because it puts a specific definition to it, and the playing quality is something that we can measure, and the conservation of its natural environment is something that we can measure with some of these inputs. And also the socially responsible management is also something that we can kind of measure. How many people are we employing? Are we using 10 million liters of water per year or 1 billion liters of water per year? These types of things can be quantified. And so I liked that. And I didn't really like the Audubon Society of New York, which runs the Audubon certification program for golf courses, which is kind of popular in the U.S., but that's very mushy and vague, and it's sort of like, okay, we have some birds on our golf course, so that's nice. I mean, it's more complicated than that. There's more to it than that. But what I really liked about the GEO program and the GEO certified program was we had to quantify our water use, our energy use, our fuel use, our pesticide use, our fertilizer use. And not only did that have to be quantified and reported, and one would have to get, to get certified, you have to provide that, and it had to be verified by an independent verifier. And then that independent verifier has to sign their name to it. So I wasn't going to sign my name to something that I didn't believe that the information was factually correct. Not only that, to get that certification, but that information would then be public on the website. And so a summary of the key points of that would be on the website. So your water use would go there. It's on the website. Anybody could see it, whether they're in the golf industry or whether they're anti-golf or whatever, they could see it. And as far as I can tell, that's all less available now. And I think...
Do you think perhaps that maybe putting so much information out there, whilst good in some cases, could also be used against golf in others? So to give you an example, let's say a golf course in Scotland, all fescue, no pesticide use whatsoever. They've got track record, 5 years, no pesticide, 2 thumbs up. Great. Amazing. A golf course in Singapore, for example, is never, ever, under the best environmental and agronomy stewardship, is never going to be able to achieve the same thing. And so if they're to be certified and they're putting up their chemical records on, for public view, that could very easily be used in a negative sense against that specific club or against golf in general. So I will perhaps defend the editorial changes that may or may not have gone on the GEO website. Maybe that's a possible reason.
That may be a possible reason, and I suppose if venues in Dubai are going to be GEO certified, and even some of the high input courses in South China or in Singapore or wherever, because of the year-round growing season and because of the climate, they naturally have higher inputs. And I've had this discussion with Jonathan Smith and with other people involved with GEO. And what I always took from what they told me, they were always telling me, let's get as many courses as possible into the program. And even if it doesn't look so good right now in terms of how much water they're using or how much pesticide they're using, the idea is to get them into the program and to let them keep track of how much they're using and show improvement over time. And so that was always
that's what I meant about referring to the low bar of entry. That's kind of what I was getting at. And then you can, well, in his view, perhaps they maintain that ambition to be better and better each year. My fear would be that you get the certification, and then from then on you can kind of coast because you've achieved it, and it's on to the next thing where you're doing an empowerment of staff award with a different organization. So that would be perhaps the concern there.
Yes, and that's where I thought by keeping all of that information public, anybody who cares can check if they're doing better or not. But I suppose there's enough potential clubs getting verified that don't want that information public, that perhaps that's why that information no longer seems to be available. Although I understand that the R&A, they also now have a big sustainability division, and now they, I think they're supporting some of this. They certainly in the past were supporting and promoting some of this certification, and I don't really see them doing much in this area either. And everything seems to me pretty, I mean, certainly they've got their Golf Course 2030 program, which seems to be focused on Europe and maybe in Australia and New Zealand for now, right? It's not quite going into so many Asian countries, except maybe Singapore, maybe a little bit in Japan. But
well, I mean, Chris Gray works with the RNA under that sustainability banner in Asia, and I know he gets around. And look, I generally have an extremely high opinion of the RNA and what they do. I kind of lean towards agreeing with them on most matters. So yeah, I do believe they're trying, their best in this area. Yeah, perhaps public facing side of things is perhaps not as visible as they might want or as we might want, let's say.
Yeah. So anyway, that's about all I'm prepared to say on a podcast about the current state of things, because I don't know what's going on behind the scenes, but I certainly know public facing and what we see on like a Facebook post or a press release about what people are calling sustainable. To me, it certainly is not really much progress from where we were a decade ago. And I think that's a pity. And I would encourage individual golf course managers or golf course ownership groups or development groups to try to be more sustainable. And I referenced the article that was published in 2013 called Documenting Your Progress Towards Sustainability as a nice framework to use. So that's, I guess that's kind of what I want to say. And it's something that I wanted to bring up in advance of some seminars that I'm going to be giving over the autumn and winter in the Northern Hemisphere, where I have to reconsider this topic again. And then I'm like, wow, where are we now in 2023 compared with where I wish we were? So, yeah.
Micah, can I ask you one? I would like it to be a question. It may be more of a statement. About 20 years ago, when Paspalum was kind of gaining popularity, and there is a book called Paspalum, The Environmental Turfgrass, where it was touted that Paspalum lower inputs of nitrogen, so on and so forth. I think now that we have 20 years of experience, you could suggest that Paspalum isn't quite as environmental as people may have originally hoped. And you could argue whether this is the cycle beginning again now with zoysia. So zoysia is the hot grass at the moment. It's being touted as much fewer inputs, much less work, and I would tend to agree with that. So let's say zoysia is more environmentally sustainable in certain climates. However, from a business sustainability perspective, let's say we rip out our Paspalum greens, we install zoysia greens. Now our inputs are going to be much less, the amount of work is going to be much less. But if you're in a competitive golf market, chances are your zoysia greens are going to be less smooth, not as fast as golf courses down the road that have ultra dwarfs or Paspalums, let's say. And in a highly competitive golf market, that probably will be detrimental to your business, whether it's minimal or whether it's 5%. I couldn't say, this is a pure hypothetical. I guess, so my question at all the end of that is, where do you fall in the kind of the support of renovating with the latest grass? Is that really a sustainable thing to do? I mean, of course, it's case by case. I mean, how much of an environmental benefit can you achieve from changing the grass, bearing in mind that greens are generally about 3% of the total acreage of a golf course?
Yeah, that's a great question, and there's many aspects to it. Most of them I will have addressed at some point on the ATC website, where I've been writing about playability and grass selection for many years. So there's hundreds of posts, and probably 50 about zoysia and 50 about paspalum and so on. And now zoysia, at least in this part of the world, it becomes popular. But I even see zoysia. There's talk about importing zoysia into Japan, which is, yeah, I often think like in Southeast Asia also, like importing zoysia is kind of like bringing, a bucket of sand to the beach, because you already have so many good zoysias here. And, the ones that are coming from the U.S. in some cases are obviously worse quality than the grass that's already here in terms of leaf texture, color, drought tolerance, seed head production, mowing requirement, and so on. And so you just wonder, like, why are people choosing this particular grass? Now, I see the same thing happening in Japan, where people are testing some varieties from outside of Japan, and I look at it saying, what are you gaining from that? So that kind of thing, I question. But and you see, like, okay, zoysia gets used in Australia now, and I wonder whether that's really the right choice in Australia. And there's courses in North Carolina in the U.S. putting in zoysia greens, and it's just like, what are you trying to do in North Carolina or in Tennessee with zoysia greens? It's like, it's cool enough there that you could pretty easily have bent grass. And if you look at the pesticide requirement in those types of climates, so I'm not talking about Southeast Asia now, where you could expect significantly reduced pesticide on zoysia, but if you start planting zoysia in places that have a winter of 4 months, 5 months in duration, you now have to prevent large patch, you have to prevent spring dead spot, you have to do a lot of fungicide, preventative fungicides to keep the disease scars from making it one of the ugliest golfing surfaces that you've ever seen. So there seems to be a lot of trendiness with zoysia. And I think in Southeast Asia, I'm more concerned about water use, because people always, they tend to sand cap golf courses. They tend to sand cap fairways with a pretty coarse sand that doesn't hold very much water. And then you throw a grass on it, zoysia, that has less drought tolerance and a higher water requirement than Bermuda grass does. So now you all of a sudden have more water requirement, and you also have more energy requirement to pump that water. And to go to the specific issue of putting quality and whether that is more sustainable, I think the cases where I really like zoysia greens, and I just think it makes sense to have it for reduced inputs and improved playability, are places like in Manila on an old golf course with big trees around the greens. Pretty much anywhere in Southeast Asia where you have big trees around the greens, lots of shade around the greens, you want to have low-cut turf. Bermuda grass is not going to perform very well at all. Seashore paspalum will perform better than Bermuda grass will, but zoysia,
but not as good as zoysia.
So in those kind of places, it's great.
Are you saying that kind of zoysia now is imitating paspalum, where when it first came out, it was overprescribed? So 20 years ago, especially around Southeast Asia, way too much paspalum golf courses were put down. And nowadays, the only time you would really use paspalum is when your water quality demands it. And do you see zoysia heading in the same direction, where zoysia greens will continue to be used, but in the next few years we'll see it only being used really in areas where the light is low enough to demand it, to demand the zoysia, and the Bermuda grass can't cope.
I hope so. Certainly, it's generally that way in Thailand. When you look at the countries that have a let's say a bigger golf market and a maybe more experience with golf, and so Thailand has so many courses with zoysia greens. All the military courses, for the most part, have zoysia greens, and a lot of the older courses have zoysia greens. Royal Bangkok Sports Club has zoysia greens. People are familiar with zoysia greens here. These aren't new zoysias. They've been zoysia for 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. So people are familiar with the type of putting surface that you get on zoysia, and in general, the owners would prefer to have Bermuda grass, and so it's a harder sell in Thailand. But I see in some of the new projects in Vietnam, and it seems like there's less of a golfing history in that country, and some of the owners are more likely to say, sure, let's use zoysia. And I don't know why I think architects should go see more of the existing golf courses instead of just going to conferences. And I mean, the whole disaster with Paspalum is, it's repeating itself, and I mean, it's the same people involved, for the most part, and because you get the owners, you got the grass supplier, you have the architect, you have the grow-in superintendents, and it's the same group of people that just go around and do this without looking at the long-term, how many resources are going to be used to produce good playability over a 10-year, 20-year, 30-year lifespan of the property. And Paspalum wasn't a good choice 20 years ago. And I think zoysia is a better choice in Southeast Asia. I don't think but it gets pushed in so many places to like central Portugal or even north of Lisbon, though not north of Lisbon, a little bit south of Lisbon. And I just don't know that zoysia needs to get used in Northern California and in Sydney and in Portugal and in places where the climate is borderline. And in Southeast Asia, to just use zoysia as often as it is, and to bring in zoysia from other parts of the world when you have perfectly good varieties locally that can be used. And the same thing in Japan. I'm just not quite sure that that's the most sustainable way to do it.
Yeah. I mean, I think you've been very pro zoysia for a very long time. But you're also willing to be critical of it where you see people being a bit overly evangelical about how good zoysia can be. It's a fantastic grass in the right circumstance, in the right climate environment, just like any other grass is. Is it underused perhaps in the right environment? Yes. Is it also now being overused in what you could suggest is the wrong environment? Also, yes.
Yeah. And I think the only thing that I can do is just try to keep learning myself and keep trying to provide the best information that I can, because that's what I do in my work with ATC and my work with Pace Turf, is just trying to be providing good turfgrass information. And so I try to learn and share that information, and then I put it on the record so we can come back and check if I was right or wrong in the future. So, you can go back and read what I was saying about Paspalum 15 years ago. And, I've written articles about sand capping, saying that sand capping is overdone too, because I think that not only is a huge money cost and a huge carbon cost to put 15 or 20 centimeters of sand, sometimes more, across an entire golf property, but now you have to add more water and you have to add more fertilizer in order to keep grass alive. And so that is, to me, like not the really sustainable way to do it. And I would argue that when you have to put more fertilizer and more water, you end up having an artificially high growth rate. Then you have to do more organic matter management to keep the surface playable. So you put a huge ongoing cost requirement and work requirement onto the golf course
But then
superintendent and the golf course owner.
I've got rain on the brain at the moment because we've had about 10 days of consecutive rain. But the alternative to not sand capping a fairway in Southeast Asia is what? Because areas that aren't sand capped under wet weather and heavy play, the result is not there. So again, going back to business sustainability, are people going to want to play a golf course that looks like a speedway track because it just can't handle traffic and play when the weather is wet?
Well, I'm all for investing in drain pipes that go to move water away, and I'm all for sand top dressing to build up a layer of coarser material at the surface. That I think that once you have about 5 centimeters of material combined with enough drains to move the water away, you now have a playable surface. And
I know this is such a long topic and we can argue back and forth. I think a one-time purchase of X 100,000 cubic meters of sand is easier for a lot of developers than the operator to continually buy hundreds of tons or thousands of tons of sand each year and maintain a program where superintendents change. Some will say it's necessary, some will say it's not. I think it's probably safer for a developer to do it in the front end rather than under operation.
Yeah, it may be, and a lot of the people that are involved in golf course construction and grow in and maintenance will just say, look, we're doing it right. We're doing something that they've got the money now. We're just going to build it for them the best way possible. And that's really the best way to do it, because we can't rely on them to fix it in the future. And they're just going to blame us if they don't put the sand and it doesn't, it could be a disaster. So I can understand business wise why that happens, but I often play 20-year-old sand-capped golf courses in Bangkok, and I hit a low draw 210 yards into the center of the fairway, and it hasn't rained for 2 months, and I get mud on the ball, and then I do that on the next hole, and I do that on the next hole, and I get a little bit frustrated at sometimes you'll have a ball plug in the fairway from a low draw on a sand-capped golf course. And so I feel like, okay, here's a lot of money that was spent that may have worked good for the first 5 years of operation or something. But if you don't do this ongoing maintenance on a sand-capped fairway, it soon gets to be worse than if you didn't sand cap altogether. And I'm just more inclined to say, let's just maintain it right. But yeah, there's no really clear answer on that one. But I'm on the side of
I guess it all depends on who's in charge. I mean, look, going back to the earlier point about Zoysia greens being slow, in the right hands, I fully believe they can be as good as an ultra dwarf green. But chances are, there are only so many world-class superintendents in the world, and there are more golf courses in existence than world-class superintendents. And so it's inevitable that perhaps a less skilled or a less educated or someone without the budget is going to end up in charge of Zoysia greens, and they won't be able to produce perhaps the promised performance characteristics, and that's when they fall behind the other grasses, which are perhaps easier to get speed out of.
Yeah, and easier to recover from if something goes wrong, because with Zoysia, one of the touted benefits is its slow growth, which is wonderful so long as the surface is perfect,
until you burn the hell out of them. Yeah,
but if you've got a blemish on it and it's growing slow, you're going to struggle to recover. Now, in Southeast Asia, you've got the benefit of tropical weather, so it actually can recover. What I worry about is when zoysia gets pushed into the places where it's cooler. Now you have such a short growing season that eventually it'll get taken over by other grasses, which we can see like around Barcelona or something where Zeon's been tried, and you don't even have to take it away. It just takes itself away in that type of climate over time, and it gets overtaken by weeds and other grasses, just because it's not hot enough there in the summer and it's too cold in the winter. And so, of course, could you make it work? Could you force that grass into that location? And that's one of those interesting places in the world where you can find Stenotaphyrum secundatum, Cynodon dactylon, Zoysia matrella, Zoysia japonica, kikuyu grass, and a lot of cool season grasses too. You can find all these grasses growing right around Barcelona, but is the slowest growing grass the one that you really want to have when you're having a professionally managed sporting surface? Maybe not. So we see in Southeast Asia also, now zoysia starts getting used on a lot more football pitches, on stadiums, as you see the problems and successes that happen with that. And I think what we see in press releases and marketing tends to be more of the successes, but there also are some failures, and it's tough. If you think, I just think it's tough to use zoysia on a soccer pitch, and I think there's a reason why that hasn't been so common around the world, but now that becomes trendy now in Southeast Asia also. So,
yeah. Look, I'm sure there are successes. I mean, I wouldn't. I don't know enough about stadium turf to really have a super strong opinion. There are certain stadiums within Asia that have had a laundry list of different grasses, and none of them have worked. So I don't want to attribute failure within a stadium environment solely to zoysia when, certain low light environments, nothing works. So it's a tricky situation. I guess people have to keep trying the latest and greatest if it's potentially better than everything else that's completely fallen flat on its face beforehand.
Yeah, I think there's I'm trying not to criticize sports field management in Southeast Asia too much, but you're exactly right. Bermuda doesn't work, Paspalum doesn't work, so you might as well try zoysia. But I think maybe some of those other grasses could work with a little bit different maintenance. But yeah, that depends. Certainly the new stadium name zoysia is going to be a lot better than Zeon. I know that Zeon is used on some sports fields, and I just don't think that's the best type for sports fields. But the stadium type, I've seen that, and that I think is going to be a nice improvement over Zeon. So that
you'd hope so. I mean, the name implies success in that environment, so
it certainly is a good name. Yeah. All right. Well, we have talked about all kinds of things, mostly trying to kind of wrap our heads around the sustainability topic, and I wanted to talk about it with you because I think there's some superintendents don't pay as much attention to it as you do. And I knew you would be able to give me some feedback about this and some good insight. So I appreciate that, Jon. Thank you very much.
Thanks. I hope it wasn't too mixed up as it came out my mouth, but it was enjoyable to talk about it.
I think it certainly sounds more clear to me what I heard from you than what was coming out of my mouth. So I can't imagine what it's going to be like for those listening to this to try to make sense of what we've just talked about. But if I could leave everybody with this, I would just say, if you're a golf course manager, a turfgrass manager, director of agronomy, superintendent, head greenkeeper, whatever, I would encourage you to have a look at that article that there's a link to on that blog post about documenting your progress towards sustainability and look at quantifying these things, that you come up with the same type of list, quantify the work that's done, quantify the inputs that are done, measure the results that are achieved, and then try to do better year after year. I think that's the best that we can do, and it takes away some of the mumbo jumbo. And then we get hard numbers, and we can say we've reduced our fuel use by 30%. We've reduced our or we've improved our playability by this amount, or we've reduced our water use by this amount. And I think these numbers are meaningful, and I think that's so much better than saying some of the press release type of stuff of like, oh, now we've added an electric mower to our fleet, so let's make a press release about it. That to me, it's ignoring that the pesticide use may have tripled. So by having all of these good numbers, we can share meaningful information, which I think is the future. And whether that needs to be shared or not, at least you know for yourself how you're doing. And that to me
I think that's one thing
important.
that perhaps is understated, and that people should want to do this just because they're the steward, the steward of the land, so to speak, and they should want to look after it in a way that kind of doesn't hurt the planet. I don't think you really need a certificate to motivate you to do that.
I agree, and I want to assume that every turfgrass manager is thinking in the same way, or soon will be thinking in that way, and that to me just seems like that's the way we should be going about it. So I was reminded of that when I remembered that article. Thank you so much for the great insight today, Jon. Anything else before we say goodbye?
No, let's leave it there.
All right, let's leave it there. Thanks, everybody, for listening and for watching. Thanks, Jon, for joining. I will sign off now for ATC from Bangkok. I am Micah Woods. Bye-bye.